When the infiltration is into labor relations, the racketeer's cut is paid by higher wages and higher prices, in other words, by the public. When the racketeer bribes local officials and secures immunity from police action, the price exacted by corrupt law enforcement, incalculably in dollars, is paid again by the public. In short, organized crime affects everyone. It cannot be the concern only of law enforcement officers. It must be the urgent and active concern of every citizen.
This is a special report by CBS News on the investigation of organized crime, begun today by the United States Senate. Here now is CBS News correspondent Roger Mudd.
Good afternoon. What set off this latest round of crime hearings by the Senate's Permanent Investigation Subcommittee was the existence of one Joseph Valachi, 60 years old, convicted dope peddler, convicted murderer, and one-time member of the Mafia, or Cosa Nostra, as its members call it in Italian, meaning our thing. More than a year ago, while serving time in the Atlanta Penitentiary, Valachi decided to talk, presumably to protect himself from a final retribution by the Mafia. Immediately, he was placed under an elaborately heavy federal guard, moved from one prison to another, all the while naming names, dates, and places. The Attorney General called it the biggest intelligence breakthrough yet in combating organized crime and racketeering in the U.S. Arrangements were made to bring Valachi before the Senate subcommittee to help the administration in its drive to get stiffer laws against organized crime. The hearings were opened this morning by the subcommittee chairman, Democrat John McClellan of Arkansas.
The existence of such a criminal organization as Cosa Nostra is frightening. This organization attempts to be a form of government unto itself and outside of the law. This tightly knit association of professional criminals demands and gets complete dedication and unquestioned obedience of its members to orders, instructions, and commands from the ruling authority or the boss or bosses thereof. Family, religion, and country are all secondary and required to be subservient to the interest of this vicious criminal syndicate. The benefits of membership therein are a share in its illicit gains from criminal activities and protection from prosecution and the penalties of the law, and also from enemies within the ranks of the criminal underworld society. The penalty for disloyalty or any serious deviation from the precepts, rules, and dictates of the order is usually death. This penalty has often been imposed and executed in the administration of its sinister government. Murder has often been ordered for a variety of reasons: a grab for power, the code of vengeance, gangland rivalries, infidelity to the organization, or even for suspicions of derelictions, particularly for informing or aiding law enforcement officials. The death sentence is usually carried out, we're advised, by a close friend of the condemned victim. We expect to hear testimony from a member of Cosa Nostra, one Joseph Valachi, who is now serving a life sentence for a crime of murder committed while in prison and serving a 20-year sentence on a conviction of narcotic laws. We believe he will be able to give a somewhat vivid description of the organization, the criminal enterprises in which its members engage, and a number of specific crimes, including murder, gangland style. We ask you to come around, Mr. Attorney General, if you will, please, sir. Mr. Attorney General, just as a matter of formality and in keeping with the rules of the committee, may I ask if you will take the oath, please, sir? You do solemnly swear that the testimony you shall give before this Senate subcommittee shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I do.
Thank you. Well, we welcome you today. Little did I ever think that this situation would be exactly what it is many years ago when we were struggling over here on this side of the table together. But I'm glad to have an Attorney General of the United States, in particular one who is such a good friend, who is experienced, knowledgeable, and understanding of the work of an investigating committee, and particularly one, a hearing of this nature where we're trying to delve into one of the greatest menaces that confronts us from within.
Organized crime, one of the biggest businesses in America, has many faces. Some are well known, like that of the gambler, operating the roulette wheel, which is not only illegal, but fixed. Another is that of the narcotics peddler, trading on the misery of the poor. There are other faces, those of racketeers who engage in extortion, prostitution, corrupt labor relations, and bootlegging. The reason racketeering can flourish in our society depends, however, on some other faces, not so well known. There is the racket's leader seeking protection from the law, and there is the public official who offers it for a price, daily betraying his position of honor and trust in his community. There is the syndicate gunman who issues threats, and there is the potential witness who receives them, frightened almost inevitably into silence. It is this last aspect which makes the job of fighting racketeering the hardest, and it is this aspect which means that one of our most important weapons in the fight at the federal and local level is criminal intelligence. Intelligence, the most detailed information obtainable on the background and activities of suspected criminals, is essential to all law enforcement. It is even more important to successful action against racketeers. Evidence concerning their clandestine operations is particularly hard to uncover. A witness who will testify in the face of threats to himself and his family is rare. This is one reason the disclosures made by Valachi are of such great significance. For the first time, an insider, a knowledgeable member of the racketeering hierarchy, has broken the underworld's code of silence. Valachi's disclosures are more important, however, for another reason. In working a jigsaw puzzle, each piece in place tells us something about the whole picture and enables us to see additional relationships. It is the same in the fight against organized crime. Valachi's information is a significant addition to the broad picture. It adds essential detail and brings the picture into sharper focus. It gives meaning to much that we already know. The picture is an ugly one. It shows what has been aptly described as a private government of organized crime, a government with an annual income of billions, resting on the base of human suffering and moral corruption. In 1957, more than 100 top racketeers met at the now infamous crime convention at Appalachian, New York. But until 1960, the federal government had only the barest shreds of evidence about what happened at that meeting. A number of the delegates, including those from Chicago, escaped detection. Federal investigative agencies are now pooling information on more than 1,100 major racketeers. Because of the investigative vigilance possible as a result of this intelligence effort, such a meeting could not occur unobserved today. Because of intelligence gathered from Joseph Valachi and other informants, we know that Cosa Nostra is run by a commission and that the leaders of Cosa Nostra in most major cities are responsible to the commission. We know that membership in the commission varies from 9 and 12 to 12 active members, and we know who the active members of the commission are today. We know that in the past 2 years, at least 3 carefully planned commission meetings had to be called off because the leaders learned that we uncovered their well-concealed plans and their meeting places. We know that the Commission makes major policy decisions for the organization, settles disputes among the families, and allocates territories of criminal operation within the organizations. For example, we now know that the meeting at Appalachian was called by a leading racketeer in an effort to resolve the problem created by the murder of Albert Anastasia. The racketeer was concerned that Anastasia had brought too many individuals not worthy of membership into the organization. To ensure the security of the organization, the racketeer wanted these men removed. A particular concern to the racketeer was that he had violated Commission rules in causing the attempted assassination of Frank Costello, deposed New York rackets boss, and the murder of Anastasia. He wanted Commission approval of these acts, which he has received. We know that the Commission now has before it the question of whether to intercede in the Gallo-Profaci family Gangland war in New York City. Gang wars produce factionalism, and continued factionalism in the underworld produces sources of information to law enforcement. Indications are that the Gangland leaders will resolve the Gallo-Profaci fight. The casualty list of this one gang war alone offers a somber illustration of how cruel and calculating the underworld continues to be. Since the summer of 1961, there have been 5 persons murdered and 13 persons seriously injured. 10 of these were shot and 1 nearly strangled, 1 beaten in a New York nightclub, and 1 beaten and then thrown from a speeding car. I might say, Mr. Chairman, that both the Gallos, Larry and Joe Gallo, appeared before this committee, as did Mr. Profaci. Such violence is not limited to New York. There have been gangland murders there have been 37 gangland murders since 1960 in Chicago alone. And in the Youngstown, Ohio area, there have been 70 bombings since 1950. We know that Joseph Magliocco, who has taken over in Brooklyn, a successor to the recently deceased Joseph Profaci, has not been confirmed by the Commission and will probably not be. This is despite the fact that Magliocco recently sought the support of the Commission, members Angelo Bruno and Steve Magadino. We know that while Vito Genovese is in federal prison, Thomas Eberly is substituting for him in New York, and Jerry Katina is doing the same in New Jersey. Because of the power that Genovese wielded within the organization and the fear in which he is held by the New York organization, no move has been made to take over the top spot, while his appeal on a narcotics conviction is pending in the courts. If Genovese stays in prison after his case is concluded, we anticipate a major underworld struggle in New York. We know that because of federal intelligence efforts, other Commission members have been limited to 1 or 2 members and have been held in highly clandestine fashion. Such intelligence is important, not only because it can help us know what to watch for, but because of the assistance it can provide in developing and prosecuting specific cases. Syndicate leaders and their associates have been identified, and all are now under intensive investigation. A number of major racketeering figures have been convicted, and many more cases are in the indictment or investigation stage. Thus, we have been able to make inroads into the hierarchy, personnel, and operations of organized crime. It would be a serious mistake, however, to overestimate the progress federal and local law enforcement has made. A principal lesson provided by the disclosures of Joseph Valachi and other informants is that the job ahead is very large and very difficult. We are doing an increasingly better job of using most of our assets in the efforts to curb the enormous power of organized crime. But the effort has only just begun. In 1961 and 1962, Congress granted us new statutory authority with which to act against the rackets. With bipartisan concern and support, we obtained new laws forbidding interstate travel for racketeering purposes, interstate shipment of gambling machines or paraphernalia, and use of interstate communications for gambling purposes. These statutes have given the Federal Bureau of Investigation jurisdiction to investigate such activity for the first time. Further, the FBI's investigative jurisdiction has been enlarged with the expansion of the Fugitive Felon and Federal Firearms Act. With these additional legal weapons, we have been able to improve greatly the federal law enforcement effort. The organized crime and racketeering section of the department's criminal division has been enlarged and revitalized, and it has been given increasingly powerful help in prosecuting cases from the various federal investigative agencies. The statistics for cases involving organized crime give some indication of our activity. For the first 6 months of this year, we secured indictments of 171 racketeering figures, compared with 24 for the same period 3 years ago. This year, the number of convictions was 160. 3 years ago, it was 35.
But the Attorney General lamented that local, state, and federal police have yet to exploit properly our most powerful asset in the battle against the rackets, an aroused, informed, and insistent public. And he cited these figures in hope that they would arouse.
Organized crime has become. As I testified before the Senate and House Judiciary Committees in the summer of 1961, we estimated that illegal gambling alone had a gross volume of some $7 billion annually. And the work and the effort that we've made since that time, Mr. Chairman, bears out that figure. We have made progress since that time. We have successfully prosecuted 1,283 gamblers for wagering tax or interstate gambling violation. This is a good beginning, but it is no more than a beginning. And the success of our efforts cannot be measured properly for several years. There is, in any event, no doubt that illegal gambling still takes in enormous amounts of money, much of which is used to feed other kinds of organized crime. To illustrate, in an interstate numbers game case, which we prosecuted successfully in New York City, records seized during a raid disclosed that this single operation grossed $6 million a year. In 3 related cases, successfully prosecuted in the Western District of Pennsylvania, a total of $40 million was involved. Figures of this magnitude have been found all over the country. In the state of Washington, the defendants in a case involving interstate transportation, a pinball machine, admitted in open court that they paid 20% of their gross income of $16,500,000 to the state in taxes in 30 months, despite the fact that the pinball machines, which were the source of the money, were illegal under state law. Narcotics also provides enormous profits. Because of the remarkable vigilance and law enforcement efforts of the Bureau of Narcotics under Henry Giordano, we know the syndicate leadership has ordered its members to stay out of the narcotic traffic. The greed of a number of racketeers is so great, however, that despite the risk and despite these orders, they have continued to operate extensively in this field. More than a score of Cosa Nostra members have been convicted recently on narcotics charges. This greed and the efforts of the Bureau of Narcotics are typified by a historic case involving an international heroin ring. This operation smuggled, conservatively speaking, $150 million worth of heroin into this country in the false bottoms of trunks supplied to unsuspecting Italian immigrants. How important this case was to the syndicate can be gauged from what happened to the 24 men indicted in New York. The body of one defendant was found in the Bronx, full of bullet holes, shortly before the trial. The badly burned body of a second defendant was found in a field near Rochester, New York, during the trial. Another defendant attempted suicide, and 3 others, the leaders of the ring here, fled the country, 2 of them forfeiting $50,000 bail. The Bureau of Narcotics, picking up their trail in the Caribbean, traced them to Italy and then to Spain, where they were arrested and returned to this country. Ultimately, they were convicted both on the original narcotics charges and also on the flight charges. The remaining defendants were convicted and sentenced to long prison terms.
But not yet, said the Attorney General, has the government been able to nail the top leaders of Cosa Nostra, mainly because of their insulation, their complicated and secret chain of command, and their isolation from their illegal activities. This brought Mr. Kennedy to his main point.
And as evidence becomes harder to obtain, the importance of informants increases correspondingly. They, to say the least, are hard to come by. The usual reply of a convicted hoodlum in a position to give information is that he doesn't want to trade a jail cell for a hearse. The disclosures of Joseph Valachi and of others with knowledge of criminal operations in various parts of the country have helped to give us unprecedented understanding of how these operations work. But even the increasing flow of information from such sources does not answer the problem. Being able to identify a top racketeer is one thing. Securing the evidence to convict him in a court of law is quite another. While the new legal weapons Congress has already given to us have been extraordinarily effective, as I indicated earlier, one major purpose in my appearing before here is to seek the help of Congress in the form of additional legislation. The authority to provide immunity to witnesses in racketeering investigation and reform and revision of the wiretapping laws.
At the conclusion of Kennedy's 24-page prepared statement, the subcommittee opened for questions, and the chairman, John McClellan, picked up the Attorney General's cue on the need for stiffer anti-crime statutes, a wiretap law, and immunity from prosecution.
Now, this, you think, is needed if we're going to really, you think it would be most useful and would become an important tool in trying to reach the higher criminals in these conspiracies.
Senator, if those three bills were passed, the wiretapping and which is the most important, those plus the immunity bills, then I would think that the need for this kind of a hearing 5 years from now would not be necessary. I think you're still going to have organized crime, you're still going to have problems, but the major effect that it has on people's lives and on communities would not exist 5 years from now. I say that if the legislation is not passed, even though this increased effort is made at the local and federal level, you're going to still have a major problem in the United States. Organized crime has grown immensely since the days of the Kefauver investigation. And I think that now perhaps we're treading water at least, but to start to make any major inroads into it, we're going to need more weapons.
Could you outline for us the difference or the relationship between the Mafia and the Cosa Nostra?
Well, I think it almost is a matter of semantics, Senator.
You can almost use them interchangeably.
Yes, and whether you call it the commission, some refer to it as the commission, and consider at that time not just the 8 to 12 men that headed up, but their whole organization. It's an organization. It's Mafia, it's the Cosa Nostra, it is, there are other names for it, but it's all refers to the same operation. I think what the importance of it is that it indicates, it shows, demonstrates that there is an organized crime operation in the United States, and that it is run by a group of 10 or 12 men at the top, like a major industrial concern.
So it ramifies out to the members of the family, a family.
That's correct. And then it's broken down into the various major areas of the United States.
You mentioned oath. Do the members of the syndicate literally take an oath of allegiance to the syndicate?
Yes, they do, Senator. They literally take an oath, and they have the bloodletting, and I think it'll be described here before the committee, but it's those who are members of this organization, who were brought into the organization, take this oath.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you, Mr. Attorney General.
Yes, it is.
Yes, I understand. Thank you.
I might say that in the past, Senator, just in connection with that, part of the provision, part of the requirement was that you had to kill somebody in order to come into the organization. That seems to have been waived lately, but you couldn't go into the organization unless you had murdered somebody.
Unbelievable.
Mr. Attorney General, just one or two more questions. You've been very considerate
Can I just
of us.
say, just add on there, Senator, there is focus on the tension on the fact that gangster, the hoodlum, is getting more into legitimate businesses, and I express concern about that. I don't want anybody to misunderstand the fact that they are also doing the same things that they were doing during the days of Al Capone, because there have been a large numbers of very brutal murders that have been committed by those involved in organized crime just over the period of the last 2 years. Certainly not a week goes by that somewhere in the United States an individual is not killed, murdered in some kind of a gangland battle, or a witness is garroted and killed. I don't know if you remember Mr. Squillanti, who appeared before this committee.
Remember him very well.
Who was involved in the garbage. Well, our information is that he was taken up into Connecticut and chopped up into little bits and then burned, and that's why they've never been able to find him. So this is going on, Senator.
Following the Attorney General this afternoon came Michael J. Murphy, Police Commissioner of New York City. He agreed with Kennedy that today's big-time criminal is more likely to wear a gray flannel suit than a black shirt, a white tie, and a diamond stick pin.
Organized crime today is a big business. And like all big business, it employs the aids and the techniques of industry. Sophistication is so far advanced that public relations policies are laid down by the various underworld groups. Ostentatious display, lavish public entertainment, conspicuous clothes, and the flashy blonde are 20 years out of date. The top echelon frowns on those who create a bad image. The air of respectability, the quiet life in the neighborhood the residential neighborhood, the portrait of the respectable, aging family man are the order of the day. Ease of transportation and communication has added to the difficulties in combating crime's higher echelons. Our constant attention has led to a large exodus of New York racketeers from New York City proper to places far and near. Yet we do not believe that any criminal interest has been relinquished to a material degree because of this. The remote control racketeer is commonplace. In addition, the Confederation is nationwide. An occurrence on the West Coast may have its genesis in New York City or vice versa. Jet transportation has made the United States a 4.5-hour nation, and the criminal select have taken full advantage of this streamlined age. Organized crime has also built for itself a strong defensive position by other means. Its use of a more venerable asset, the Constitution, has made it almost impregnable. The adoption to illegal purposes of the safeguards intended to shield the rights of the law-abiding citizen are well known.
From all indications, Valachi himself will be testifying early next week, but his appearance will not be without controversy. The Philadelphia Bulletin says a psychiatrist examined Valachi and found him mentally ill. The New York Herald Tribune has quoted an administration source to the effect that the Attorney General, displeased with his almost exclusive identification with civil rights, is using Valachi to build up his image as a crime fighter. And Milton Wessel, former chief of the Organized Crime Division under Eisenhower, has asked publicly why the Valachi case, if it's so good, is being revealed in the Senate and the press, not in the courts. Senator McClellan has answered that if his subcommittee can convince the public there is a mafia, it will have performed a service. This is Roger Mudd in Washington. Good afternoon.
This has been a special report from CBS News. Portions of this program were on edited videotape. This is the CBS television.